For the first time in 9 years, a Canadian Prime Minister will visit China.
We have to talk to each other if we want to make progress and address issues. We have now unlocked a path forward to address current issues and to build the enormous opportunities between our two countries.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of APEC last fall set the stage for this week's visit, focused on trade and global security. For more on what's at stake, we are joined by Michael Kovrig, former Canadian diplomat in China and senior advisor on Asia for the International Crisis Group. Welcome to your morning.
Anne-Marie, good morning. Good to be here.
The Prime Minister talking about a high-value relationship, but talk about a high-stakes trip. The meetings will start from the 13th to the 17th, at least that's the length of the trip. And he is going to meet with China's president, with the premier, and business leaders. Talk to us about just the thinnest of tightropes that the Prime Minister needs to walk. What should our expectations be going in, and what does success look like coming out of this trip?
Sure. It is a very important trip, there's no question. First trip in a very long time, nearly a decade, so symbolism alone matters. But more importantly, it reflects a tactical recalculation by both sides, and it's actually China that has changed its policy more than Canada has. Canada's been trying to reopen frozen channels ever since Beijing shut them after Meng Wanzhou's arrest in 2018. Not a day I'm likely to forget. That became more urgent once Donald Trump returned to office and started destabilizing Canada-US relations. Meanwhile, starting last year, for similar reasons, China's own calculus changed, and now Xi Jinping wants to show that China can manage stable relations with G7 countries through a very stormy period in geopolitical rivalry, slowing growth, and rising global pushback against China's hugely problematic economic policies. Not having working ties with Canada looks bad for that narrative. But reopening dialogue doesn't mean trust has been restored. It just means communications resumed. And so this trip is really a test of whether disciplined, interest-based engagement can produce limited, tangible benefits for Canadians without weakening Canada's sovereignty or its security. So it's about stabilization and hedging, not friendship.
Right. So, you mentioned communication is open. And, often when you're looking at relationship reconciliation, they say communication is the first step. But as you also outlined, it has to be very careful communication because everything is weighted in this delicate balance. Last week, you shared with CTV News Channel that Ottawa needs to have careful tactics and strategies to avoid being manipulated or painted into a corner by China. What did you mean by that? Which topics does Ottawa need to approach with the most caution?
Right, so every Canadian Prime Minister comes in thinking they can manage China better than their predecessors, and every time structural realities assert themselves. Canadians keep trying optimism in the relationship, but reality keeps biting. So we have to break out of that recurring cycle of hope, disappointment, and then damage control. So expectations need to be modest, right? Dialogue can manage differences, but it can't erase them. And so the goal needs to be stabilization, not transformation. No breakthroughs, no golden era, just clearer boundaries and messages and fewer surprises, and some limited progress where interests generally overlap. So the key pitfalls lie in making compromises in exchange for economic benefits that ultimately sacrifice Canada's sovereignty or put its national security at risk. So it's about what you agree on in the room with the Chinese, and then it's even more importantly about what Canada and Canadians do to protect themselves and provide safeguards after the meetings.
Yeah, those are not two small issues: security and economic preservation. We know our pork producers and our canola farmers know all about the pitfalls when things go wrong with this relationship. Just as a reminder to people, in 2024, trade between our two nations hit $119 billion. So, in that context, how are you expecting Prime Minister Carney to balance our economic interests with our human rights concerns? How do we not back down on our strong stance, but also protect our interests?
That's a great question. So obviously, Prime Minister Carney has a mandate to deliver economic growth and prosperity and to resolve trade disputes that are hurting major Canadian constituencies like prairie farmers, for example, seafood from the Atlantic provinces. But at the same time, he can't give ground on Canadian values and on our political independence and our sovereignty. And those are not just feel-good things, right? We can't just throw those under the bus just because of geopolitical turmoil and challenges. So what he needs to do is be clear that the door is open to limited economic cooperation in specific sectors where there are benefits that are clearly defined for Canadians and for the country as a whole, not just specific regions. But China cannot buy Canada's silence on egregious, harmful behavior and policies that it's continuing to pursue. And being firm but diplomatic on those issues actually earns respect from China. If you just knuckle under and acquiesce to all their demands, they'll be pleased with that, but they're not going to respect you for it. And I think Prime Minister Mark Carney has that kind of statesman-like gravitas and experience that he should be able to get that complicated message across. And then it's all about following through with it, being clear that when China does problematic things, like threatening Taiwan, like trying to coerce Japan and the Philippines, like supplying weapons to, or not weapons, excuse me, but machine tools and other resources to Russia in its invasion of Ukraine, or engaging in foreign interference, transnational repression, or espionage, or other things against Canada, that will have a concrete impact on the scope of potential cooperation with Canada, and that ultimately it's not in China's long-term interest to behave that way with Canada.
Michael Kovrig, we appreciate your insights as we look ahead to the Prime Minister's historic trip, I guess we could call it, to China, what needs to be done, what Canada's strength is going in, and where we need to be careful. Appreciate you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.